Hey everyone, it's Ben Hardy here, and in today's video we'll be comparing the new G550 G-Wagon with the inline 6 to the Ineos Grenadier, which is basically a budget utilitarian G-Wagon, and we're going to see if it's really worth paying 2 times as much to get a 550 over the Grenadier, considering they have the same engine type. Before we get into this video, I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to the Mercedes-Benz of Draper, Utah for giving me some time with the G-Wagon. I'll include a link to their website in the description down below. If you have any questions, you need any help, just ask for Corey. Also include a link to my car buying guide. Let's get into it. So powering the new G-Wagon is a turbo 3-liter inline 6 that goes through a 9-speed. It puts out 443 horsepower and then 413 pound-feet of torque. Fuel economy 17 around town and then 19 on the highway. And powering the Grenadier is also a turbo 3-liter inline 6. Goes through an 8-speed instead of a 9-speed. Now, power outputs with this are 282 horsepower and then 331 pound-feet of torque, so quite a bit less power. And then fuel economy, I've been averaging about 17 miles per gallon. Before we move forward with this comparison, I do want to mention if you want to see more videos just like this, then I recommend you subscribe because I post content every single day. Now, if you guys haven't heard my conspiracy theory before, I think that the Ineos Grenadier is the last generation G-Wagon, basically frame, all that kind of stuff, and then just retooled and has some different sheet metal on it to make it look like the Grenadier. And I mean, when you look at these next to each other, there's so many similarities. So first off, you can see with the hoods on both of them compared to the fender, and then just look at the front end. Again, the G-Wagon's curved a little bit more, but even when you pop down to the bumper, the overall kind of shape very similar, and then you see the skid plate underneath, and the G-Wagon's is blacked out, so it's kind of hard to see, but again, very similar shape. And so when you see them next to each other, I mean, again, they're not identical, but even like look at the windshield placement and everything, and I mean, this is really telling to me personally. You can see that they both have the same style of windshield with how it's actually placed onto the body, and it goes even further. So we obviously have an off-road tire and wheel set up on the Grenadier versus the G-Wagon has these very fancy looking wheels, but you notice the wheelbase is pretty much identical with both of the vehicles, and you can see the bodies almost sit at the exact same height. Obviously rock rail versus side step on the G-Wagon, and then there's a big difference with the mirrors. The G-Wagon mirrors are a lot fancier looking, and then the fender flares being painted on the G-Wagon. Then this trim here, really cool. So lots of fancy trim, whereas with the Grenadier it's all utilitarian utility. But yeah, you can see the back, it's very similar. Something to note that's different though is this has solid axles front and rear, whereas the G-Wagon has independent front suspension and a solid rear axle. And then taking a look at the rear of both of them, you can see there is a very similar placement with even the spare tire, which I think is funny, but the swing gates are completely different. So with the G-Wagon, the swing gate opens up this way for this full door, and that's really cool with the trim there. But yeah, we've got pretty good cargo space, and then notice you have this section here that's raised. So I mean, there is a difference with the cargo area with both of them, and the G-Wagon makes a much better sound when you open it. The Grenadier has the half door, which is kind of interesting, and then got the swing gate on the other side. But notice that it does come up a little bit on the sides. Not the exact same as a G-Wagon, but very similar. And again, notice instead of carpeting and leather and all that, it's just hard touch surfaces that are easy to clean. Again, utility versus luxury. And I mean, it makes sense. You got a ladder on the back, you got storage in the spare tire carrier, whereas you have a fancy painted spare tire carrier. And then taking a look at the interiors, look at the door panel here in the Grenadier, just how that's all shaped, all of this, and even the roofline area here. And then how the seating is all placed. And if we actually compare that to the G, which again, much better door sound, very similar dimensions. You might even say they're pretty much the same. The roofline even comes down in a pretty similar area. And then you can see how the door panel, all the angles and everything are shaped. Much nicer materials, of course. Carbon fiber, much better sound system, heated seats. Again, way more luxury features. And of course, the G-Wagon door sound. Now, the Grenadier does not have regular keyless entry, so that is something to note. And then you can see the seats here. I mean, we'll compare those to the G-Wagon seats. Not nearly as fancy. They're also manually adjustable. Getting in's a little bit of a pain. Not the worst. And yeah, with all this manual stuff, we also have to do this. Yeah, gotta put a key in the ignition. You also don't have a gauge cluster, Everything's in this screen here in the center, so that's a big difference. But you have a bunch of cool physical controls down below. Got heated seats, basically, single zone climate, so I don't even have dual zone with it. And of course got the BMW shifter because it has a BMW engine. And you can see the grab handle down below. And then we've got these cool little windows up top, and then a bunch of controls here up top. It does have front rear locking differential setup. It's got a low range center locker too. This is that 4-wheel drive, so kind of like a traditional 4-wheel drive select. But the point here with the Grenadier is it's very utilitarian. And now if we compare that to the G-Wagon, the G-Wagon has keyless entry now, which is a nice feature. And then you can see much nicer material use here on the door panel itself. You can see you've got power adjustable seats, heated and cooled function, memory seat function, blind spot monitoring with the mirrors. Much nicer leather seats. Look at those. Way fancier. Getting in is a little bit easier with the G-Wagon actually, but it's still pretty high up. Then you can see here with the full digital gauge cluster, we got a bunch of fancy controls here, and even like stitching on the airbag cover. The column shifter is cool. 360 camera system. The Grenadier just has a backup camera. This has a big touchscreen infotainment system. Still triple locked, just like the Grenadier, but the functions are here in the center. And then you can see you've got a grab handle in a very similar location, a little bit different actually. But yeah, that has some fancy carbon fiber on it. You got a fancy headliner. You've got a sunroof up top. So yeah, there's a lot of fancy stuff with this. So because this Grenadier has a lot of off-road stuff added to it, it's a $95,000 build roughly. The G-Wagon is $160,000 with all the options, so there's still a pretty big price difference, but let's see how they compare with driving. Well, let us set off in the G-Wagon first and foremost, and then we'll drive the Grenadier. So we'll drive the real G-Wagon, then we'll drive the wannabe G-Wagon. And I actually drove a 2003 G500 the other day, modified, but that kind of really solidified my, let me turn this down. I don't want to turn it off, I just wanted to turn it down. That really solidified my conspiracy with the Grenadier being basically a reused G-Wagon platform. And I think it makes sense. I think because Magna developed both the G-Wagon and the Grenadier, that they're just like, hey, we already have this platform. We'll just tweak it just enough so that we don't get in trouble with Mercedes, and then we'll go with it. So the first thing with the new G-Wagon, it's got independent front suspension, which means that it doesn't do the solid axle kind of back and forth all over the place stuff. It's a lot more in line. Steering's really, really good. It's direct, it's quick. So this is still a body and frame SUV, still has some body and frame driving characteristics, but it's far more modern, far more luxury compared to the previous gen G-Wagon. And this inline six, it's good. It's got good, you know, torque for the most part. It doesn't feel quite as torquey as the old V8, but it's got solid power. And again, the benefit with this is going to be the better fuel economy. But I'm also not sure how many G-Wagon owners actually care about that. That's something I've been thinking about, because this is a $160,000 car at the end of the day, and you know, nobody wants to spend more money on gas than they have to. But I will also say that someone who's spending $160,000 plus on a vehicle, I don't think that gas costs are at the top of their concerns, at the top of their priorities. And especially the fuel economy difference isn't as big as you'd think. 14-16 on the old one, 17-19 on the new one. So that means your average is going to go from like 15 roughly to 18. So again, that's not nothing, but 3 miles per gallon, I think most rich people are more than okay with having that extra expenditure. But yeah, overall suspension is really comfortable. Insulation is really good. The G-Wagon again is a luxury SUV, and the power, it's pretty good with this inline six. Again, it's not quite as rambunctious as the V8 with the torque and all of that, but I think that most people that have 550 with the V8 and they go to this, they're going to miss the sound, but they're not really going to feel like they're driving a slower vehicle by any means. It's mostly going to be a sound deal. So overall, the G-Wagon gives you utilitarian capability off-road and on-road with a bunch of luxury car features. This is full-on luxury car. I mean, with the interior, with the features, 360 camera, all that, like everything is luxury. And so basically, if you want to drive a tank but you don't want to concede what it costs to drive a tank when it comes to driving dynamics, that's what the new G-Wagon does. It gives you the tank-like experience, but then you also get a bunch of luxury with it. Well, Grenadier, I will say, the Grenadier's interior does feel a little bit tighter than the G-Wagon's. And again, my conspiracy with that is the new G-Wagon, they increased the dimensions a little bit. The old G-Wagon, though, tighter interior. So my conspiracy will keep going. I wish that Ineos or someone would just come out and say, hey, we repurposed a G-Wagon platform, deal with it. And honestly, I think it would actually help them sell more cars, because do you know how many comments I got in the channel of people saying, I want a utilitarian G-Wagon in the US? And it's like, we literally have one now. It just doesn't have a Mercedes badge on it. So first off, the steering's super vague because solid axles, and you know, you're always going to have more vague steering when you have a solid front axle. But and it's also the steering rack itself too. They've done that for off-road purposes to make it so that when you go over a big bump, the steering rack doesn't snap back on you. And I've seen people say that this is undrivable. I don't have a massive amount of miles on this, 3,300 miles, as you can see, but I do daily drive this when I don't have manufacturer press cars. And so when I'm not driving a manufacturer car, I'm driving this, and it's great to daily drive. There is more, so first, again, since this is G-Wagon comparison, more road noise from the tires, more wind noise as well. It's not bad, but there is more noise. It's kind of like going from the new Bronco to the Wrangler. The Bronco's just a little bit more insulated. The G-Wagon's a bit more insulated. The seats aren't as comfortable as the G-Wagon. The suspension over bumps, it handles it just as well, but the G-Wagon's just a little bit smoother in certain ways. But I've noticed that under bigger compression, this actually handles it better. Now, one thing to note is that G-Wagon does not have active shocks. Mercedes' active shock system, I would say, is better than this fixed shock system at handling big bumps. So there's my caveat there. So if you got a 550 with the active shocks, that's a better ride. And obviously body and frame feel going over the bumps and all of that. And the torque's really good. This actually, even though it has way less power and less torque, it doesn't feel like it has less torque when you drive it. Now, we'll get like a full-blown acceleration. That's where you'll see this doesn't quite have the juice that G-Wagon has. But it's not slow. It is not slow by any means. Turning radius on this, you got to really crank it. So you see what I'm talking about? The G-Wagon would have already been up. So the G-Wagon's just got a bit more juice. But this engine was tuned for reliability rather than power. So to sum things up with this comparison, this is the comparison I really wanted to do, was the new G-Wagon with the inline 6 versus this. Because, again, you're basically getting the old G-Wagon with an inline 6 for a lot less money. Because the Grenadier starts at 70, the new G-Wagon starts at 150, basically. This is here's a summary in my opinion. If you want a status symbol, this is probably never going to be a status symbol. It looks cool, but the G-Wagon, right, it's always going to have that name. So status symbol, the G-Wagon is doing that. When it comes to off-roading, this is obviously less money and more kitted out for off-roading, so this would be the obvious pick. It's not like the G-Wagon is super capable off-road, but you're spending twice as much money plus for something that is pretty similar in capability and, well, less capable, because you're gonna have to add off-road tires and everything, whereas this already comes with it. So there's the off-road side of things. And then, yeah, the G-Wagon has more luxury. I would describe the G-Wagon as utility luxury vehicle. This is just a utility vehicle. There's no luxury about the Grenadier, even though Ineos has that in their advertising. It's nice. Like, from my perspective, coming from a Wrangler, this is fantastic. But if I went from a G-Wagon to this, yeah, I would feel like I was downsizing in luxury pretty big in terms of the material use, the insulation, the drive, and all of that. But yeah, with that being said, if you want a luxury G-Wagon, Mercedes offers it. If you want a utilitarian G-Wagon, pull your head out of your you-know-what and look at the Ineos. Go and drive one. I think that if more people drove these, they would realize what this is. And once they realize what this is, then they might realize that this should be on their radar, whereas it wasn't. That's all.